Hey guys, tonight we're going to reveal a dark truth hidden behind the curtain of history. The whole world honors Queen Elizabeth I as a symbol of power and purity, but there's a horrifying secret few people know. Her own body was a source of disease. This wasn't caused by enemies or war, but by her 13 most disgusting and terrifying habits. They were not only filthy but also so dangerous that they turned the magnificent palace into a rotting hotbed of infection. Each habit harbored a deadly danger, silently spreading throughout the court. Servants and courtiers successively contracted strange illnesses and vanished without explanation, because the pathogens had crept into every corner and every object they touched. Tonight, we will not only tell a story but also pull back the curtain on one of the most horrible secrets in royal history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm always curious to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Disgusting hygiene habit number 1. Menstrual cloths' hidden peril in the royal kitchen. In the muted glow of dawn light, when the stone floors of the palace still hold the night's chill, a small group of laresses gathers at a low wooden table, their faces drawn and weary. They bear the most intimate burden of the court's hidden rituals, washing Elizabeth I's menstrual cloths. These soft linen squares, seemingly innocent swathes of fabric, are in truth saturated with much more than crimson tide. They have absorbed sweat, perfumed powders, and the subtle dust of lead and mercury cosmetics. Under the gentle trickle of water from a bronze spout, the laresses coax the cloths into a basin of tepid, foul-smelling liquid. With bruised knuckles reddened by repeated scrubbing, they knead each rag as if it were dough. Their fingers dig into the weave, extracting fresh stains while feeling the lingering grit of dried blood. Each cloth, when wrung, yields trickles of dark water clouded with microscopic life. Elongated bacteria wriggle, unseen. Bits of skin and hair float like flotsam on the surface. The laresses, their arms bared to the elbow, are smeared in these secretions. Their skin feels slick, as though they carry a second membrane no one else can see. Once scrubbed, the cloths are laid across wooden frames by open casement windows. In theory, sunlight and breeze will bleach and dry them, but the palace's corridors form a labyrinth of shaded vaults, and a cold damp often rolls in, leaving the linens only half dry. The laresses, in a ritual of perfume dissimulation, shake lavender sprigs over the cloths and dust them liberally with frankincense powder. This fragrant dust settles into the fabric, masking but not eradicating the fetid undercurrent of decay. Meanwhile, in the vast firelit kitchen below, stirring spoons and ladles wait on hooks above the work tables. Without awareness of the contamination perched above them, cooks begin their day's tasks, chopping vegetables, simmering broths, kneading dough. A lares, cloth slung over her shoulder, descends the back stair and brushes past a cook's arm, the herbal dust leaving faint purple smudges on his linen sleeve. Another lares, with damp hair plastered to her forehead, sets her bundle by the pantry door. A stray bead of water laden with unseen pathogens falls to the stone and splashes across a wooden board used for slicing venison. No one questions this procession of cloths, from basin to drying rack to chamber. In the morning light, the Queen's attendants carry steaming bowls of porridge and sweet cakes upward, unaware that each bite, each sip, carries a risk. Within hours, the first cases appear. A kitchen maid collapses, clutching her abdomen, retching violently. Her screams echo against the cold tiles. The head cook, pale and trembling, suffers waves of watery diarrhea that leave him weak and hollow-eyed. Orders from the Queen's steward insist that service continue, so an understudy takes her place, wiping sweat from his brow, praying he will not follow the same dreadful path. In these first days, the terror is confined to the kitchen. But as waiters carry trays into the grand halls, the contagion spreads. A guard tasting a drop of wine from the Queen's goblet feels a sudden chill, a tremor along his spine. A footman who adjusts the heavy tapestry in the royal chamber later breaks out in a high fever. Those who cross the threshold of that scented world leave always with a piece of it clinging to their hands, to the undersides of their fingernails, to the hems of their garments. Outside court walls, families whisper of a strange flux, affecting any servant who returns from Westminster. Parish registers record sudden spikes of bowel weakness, violent purgings, and sudden wasting fevers. These sparse entries dry as church documents veil the truth of discoloured linen and perfumed rags. Mothers pray at home for the safe return of daughters on household staff. Fathers stare in disbelief at the empty chair where a son should have dined. All the while the Loresses carry on, their shifts never ending, their bodies becoming reluctant compendia of disease. Some Loresses fall ill in turn, their limbs too spent to stand at the basin. Under orders, they remain at work until they can no longer lift a cloth or steady a bowl. In the hush of late night, a dying Laris slips away to a corner bed, her final breath escaping as a faint hush. The next day, another takes her place unaware she is stepping into the same pool of discarded water and blood-soaked dreams. In reflecting upon this first, shocking habit menstrual cloths as a hidden peril, we see the cruel irony of royal privacy. The Queen, celebrated for her dignity and grace, is served by women whose most secret labours unleash a tide of illness that flows unchecked through all ranks of the court. This story's quiet horror reminds us how easily the most private acts, unaccompanied by simple protections like boiling water or soap, can imperil an entire kingdom. And so, as your gaze drifts from these shadowed kitchens and perfumed rackets, let your heart slow. Know that today, we have learned the value of disinfection, of clean running water, and of respect for every cloth, every bowl, every pair of hands that prepares even the humblest meal. May your thoughts now sail gently on the quiet currents of sleep, leaving behind the memory of damp rags and ancient stench. Good night, rest easy. And remember, a world cleansed of fear is built upon the simple act of washing well. Disgusting hygiene habit number 2. Wigs, lead powder, and nests of fungus and lice. In the hush of the royal dressing chamber, lit by wavering candles and heavy with the scent of rosewater, a second horror awaits, the Queen's lavish wigs. These towering hairpieces woven from horsehair or fine linen threads are coated in layers of white lead powder and perfumed dust, intended to invoke awe and disguise imperfections. Yet beneath this splendid facade, the wigs have become moving fortresses of decay and infection. From the moment a fresh heap of lead-tinted curls is lifted onto the Queen's head, her scalp is suffocated. No water passes through these heavy coils. Instead, the skin beneath becomes moist and warm, its natural oils unable to evaporate, its follicles choked by particulate matter. In this dark, pressurized microclimate, microscopic fungi take hold candida and molds that banish any hope of cleanliness. Lice, too, find refuge in the tangled strands, their tiny legs clinging to the fibres, feasting on the Queen's blood and flourishing unseen in the chalky powder. Each day, a team of attendants, maids of honour and hairdressers handles these wigs with gloved hands or, more often, with bare fingers dusted in powder. They lift, reshape, and repin each elaborate curl, using wooden combs that scrape against hair and scalp alike. Those combs, though occasionally brushed against cloths, are never truly cleaned. They bear the imprint of past infections, caked on flakes of dead skin, granules of lead, and dark stains of old blood. As a comb is drawn through the wig, it catches more than a stray tress. It dislodges nits and fungal spores, scattering them into the air and onto the attendants' wrists and faces. The nape of the Queen's neck, where the wig's edge rests, becomes a simmering rash of red pimples and pustules. A maid's, whose duty is to adjust the hairpiece, brushes her hand across this inflamed area, then lifts a fresh curl into place, transferring pathogens onto new surfaces. The slightest scratch from a bared fingernail allows bacteria to enter the skin, and soon a painful cyst forms, leaking thick fluid that cements itself into the hair and powder above. No ointment can penetrate the crusted layers. When court physicians apply herbal salves or sprinkle more lead-based cosmetics to dry the sore, they only deepen its reach. When the Queen removes her wig at day's end, the piece is placed on a carved wooden stand beside the dressing table. Here it rests until morning, polluting the very air with spores and lice that crawl out into the chamber. A gentle breath disturbs the curls, releasing a plume of chalky dust and dislodged insects that drifts across velvet cushions and onto silk gowns. Any servant who enters to collect fresh towels or to light new candles risks inhaling these particles, which settle onto skin or into nostrils. Because the wigs are considered royal property, attired only by or for the monarch, they are never laundered in water. Instead, attendants are instructed to freshen them by dusting with scented powders and shaking them out. This practice drives the fungi deeper into fibers and crushes lice into the mass of hair, allowing them to burrow further rather than be expelled. Over weeks and months, the accumulation of debris forms a compact nest, half hair, half decay, where countless nits hatch, mature, and reproduce. As a result, the palace experiences a peculiar malaise. Servants on hair duties develop persistent scalp itches that evolve into full-body rashes. Some lose clumps of hair when handling the wigs, their scalps raw and weeping. The scratching, intended to relieve discomfort, only breaks the skin further, inviting bacterial invasion that leads to serious cellulitis or even septicemia. And yet, no one dares refuse the appointment. Fear of royal displeasure outweighs any dread of disease. Outside the private chambers, complaints surface in hushed tones. The young lady who delivered the morning tea mentions a creeping itch she cannot quell. A court musician, brushing past the Queen's quarters, feels a sudden tingle on his neck and finds a small red bump the next day. These incidents multiply, but official reports speak only of unexplained irritations and common winter ailments. Nobody connects these random afflictions back to the lead-dust-laden wigs and their fungal inhabitants. Despite cries for intervention, the court's response remains superficial. Physicians propose stronger disinfectants, more lead, or a heavier dusting of luxurious perfumes to overpower the smell of rot. Yet each remedy compounds the problem. The thicker the powder, the more inhospitable the wig becomes for any attempt at cleanliness. The more the fungi and lice proliferate. It is a vicious cycle. The search for radiance accelerates decay, and the quest for perfection seeds more infection. And so the Queen parades through the grand galleries, her silhouette crowned by clouds of white curls. Courtiers and ambassadors gape at her magnificence, while those behind the scenes quietly suffer the consequences. For in every loop and coil of those wigs lies a hidden ecosystem of disease, an unspoken testament to what happens when beauty is prized above basic hygiene. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, let the image of powdered wigs and shadowed dressing rooms fade into sleep's embrace. Remember how far we have come, how a simple act of washing can transform a potential plague into a thing of the past. Drift away on the soft promise of clean water and open windows. Good night, and may your dreams be free of creeping lice and chalky dust. Disgusting hygiene habit number 3. The Queen's scalp and the comb of Contagion. In the hushed quiet of the royal chamber, long after dawn's faint glow has been hidden behind thick velvet draperies, another insidious ritual unfolds. This is the moment when the Queen's true crown of power, her own hair, reveals itself not as a mark of majesty but as the epicenter of a silent epidemic. Beneath layers of perfumed linen and heavy brocade, Elizabeth I's scalp has long been neglected, coated instead in a crust of lead-based cosmetics and mercury ointments that strip away moisture and life. The once healthy skin has hardened into scaly plates that crack and bleed, leaking toxins and pus into every crevice. It is here that the royal hairdresser steps forward, wooden comb in hand, its teeth warped by age and heavy use. This is no ordinary comb, but rather the comb of Contagion, a simple implement turned weapon. Though honoured as a piece of courtly ritual, it bears the accumulated horrors of countless grooming sessions, fine particles of white lead powder, crumbly flakes of dead skin, and the thick residue of partially healed sores. Each tooth is a reservoir, a microfiltration device retaining pathogens that will be released anew with every stroke. Each morning, the hairdresser leans close to the Queen's throne-like chair, gingerly gathering stray curls and teasing out tangles. With each pass of the comb, the process risks carving fresh abrasions into the languishing scalp. Tiny lacerations open pathways for Staphylococcus and Streptococcus, eager to invade and fester. As the comb moves, it lifts up clouds of dust, minuscule particles that drift through the stale air and settle on surrounding silks. The sound is a soft rasp, an ominous whisper of steel on flesh, barely louder than a sigh. Then comes the final blow. The hairdresser places the comb back into its wooden sheath, its handle slick with a paste of herbal fragrance, meant to mask the carnage within. Forgotten, the comb rests in a velvet-lined box marked Royal Property, where it sits untouched until the next dawn. There it waits, a dormant time bomb, preserving the queen's secret decay until summoned again. Meanwhile, the laresses and footmen, those unfortunate souls tasked with adjusting collars or delivering trays, pass by the dressing chamber, their hands brushing against the velvet cushion or the silver tassel of a drapery pull. On those hands linger the comb's harvest, spores of fungal infection, eggs of head lice, and myriad bacteria that multiply in the damp confines of the palace's inner rooms. Within days, the first victims appear. A lares complains of an itchy red rash behind her ears, an area she once thought safe from the queen's influence. Soon, patches of hair begin to fall out in clumps, leaving her scalp raw and mottled. When she seeks help, the court physician offers yet more mercury ointment, believing it will draw out the poison. Instead, the sores deepen, turning into oozing ulcers crusted with blackened scabs. Next, a footman on guard duty near the queen's outer chamber experiences fever and chills, so violent he staggers from his post. In the infirmary, his condition is recorded as sudden systemic weakness, though the truth runs deeper. Each step he took carried him through an unseen minefield of virulent pathogens. Though quarantined, he too succumbs, or so the palace records state. Yet whispers among the staff tell a darker tale. An epidemic born of royal negligence, spread by a comb that should have been an instrument of vanity, not disease. Despite mounting casualties, the ritual persists. The next hairdresser inherits the same comb, passed down like a twisted heirloom. The comb's wooden handle grows smooth from repeated use, unforgivingly slick when gripped. Those who wield it grow accustomed to the silent screams of suffering they unleash with each grooming session. None dare refuse, for to deny the queen's daily ritual would be to court ruin or exile. Outside the palace, in the narrow lanes and crowded markets of Elizabethan London, the contagion quietly follows. A servant returns to her small lodgings, bringing with her the invisible burden. Her neighbours, unaware of the royal link, fall sick with a mysterious ailment, hair loss, scalp infections, and chronic fevers that linger. Mothers weep for children whose heads become ringed with pus-filled sores. Apothecaries prescribe poultices of herbs and mustard seed, utterly powerless against the source emerging from a royal comb. In time, the palace physicians propose a radical measure. The comb will be cleaned with boiling water, and new ivory teeth will be fitted. Yet tradition and superstition balk at the notion, why tamper with an object held sacred? The ivory arrives, but the cleaning is half-hearted. Without boiling or disinfecting agents, the pathogens remain entrenched. And at dawn's next waking, the cycle begins anew. It is a quiet horror that persists behind gilded doors, where a simple tool of grooming becomes the Trojan horse of disease. The crown might rest upon the queen's head, but it is the comb that wields true power, power to spread suffering with every gentle stroke. So, dear listener, as your eyes grow heavy and the flicker of this tale wanes, let the memory of that comb slip away like a forgotten dream. Breathe deeply, trusting in the running water and clean linens that guard your own peace. Sleep now, in comfort, far from the silent menace of a royal grooming ritual. Good night, and may your rest be untroubled by scratch or scab. Disgusting hygiene habit. Number 4. Diseased breath and thrush, the invisible weapon of the queen's mouth. In the soft half-light of dawn, when velvet curtains still hold fast the night's cool shadows, another hidden horror takes shape around Elizabeth I's most celebrated feature, her voice. Portraits depict her as the very embodiment of regal composure, lips pressed into a measured smile, each word a clarion call to her realm. Yet beneath that porcelain facade lies an invisible arsenal of infection, unleashed with every breath and every uttered decree. For years, the Queen's brilliant white makeup and luxurious rouge have concealed a festering secret. Her mouth is an incubator, brimming with fungal overgrowth and bacterial colonies. The mercury and lead powders she layers onto mask scars have done more than burn her skin. They have corroded her gums, leaving them swollen, irritated, and prone to pockets of infection. In the damp crevices between her teeth and her lip line, Candida albicans thrives unchecked, its yeast cells multiplying in the stifled warmth. At the same time, Staphylococcus aureus, surely a familiar courtly name, colonizes her tongue and throat, forming biofilms that persist, despite the ministrations of palace physicians. Each morning, as she raises her fan or lifts a delicate lace handkerchief to her face, the queen exhales clouds of this microscopic particles, heavy with fungal spores and golden clusters of bacteria. Courtiers leaning forward in eager attention find themselves drawing in these invisible emissaries. The initial effect is faint, a tickle at the back of the throat, a slight rasp against the vocal cords. But within hours, the seeds of illness take root. A secretary clutching her quill feels it first an itching on her tongue, the faint burn of thrush. Soon, she develops a sore throat that blossoms into a persistent cough, each hack driving bacteria deeper into her lungs. Those entrusted with handling the Queen's correspondence fare no better. As they accept letters sealed with her signet ring, they inadvertently press stained fingertips to their own lips. Tiny droplets of saliva ripe with microbial agents transfer onto blotting paper and parchment. These documents then make their rounds, read by ambassadors, copied by scribes, passed from desk to desk. In every crease and margin, the Queen's infected breath lingers, awaiting contact with fresh skin or a breath held too long. Even simple tokens of regard carry risk. When she offers a cup of spiced wine or sips from a silver goblet, the germs hitch a ride on its rim. The cup returns to the scullery, where a scullery maid rinses it in scented water rather than genuine soap and hot embers. The invisible stowaways endure, embedding themselves in the silver's tarnish and wood's grain. When the cup is next used perhaps in a modest chamber, or a distant servant's quarters, the drink poured is unwittingly a potion of colonization. In the castle's outer corridors, the castle guard stands vigil, drawn into the invisible maelstrom each time the Queen's procession passes. By nightfall, they report scratchy throats and hoarseness. Next day, their numbers dwindle, as each cough and fever lays them low. The guard roster is patched by fresh recruits, but they too fall prey to the same unseen scourge as soon as they greet the Queen. Court physicians attempt to intervene with mixtures of sage and salt, gargles of vinegar and wine. They instruct the attendants to burn aromatic resins, myrrh, frankincense to purify the air. Yet these measures prove futile. The molds and bacteria thrive in more than mere vapor. They colonize cloth, silver, even the tapestries that line the halls. A single hush, an unguarded breath in council, sends microdroplets into the velvet folds, creating a reservoir of disease that re-emerges at the slightest disturbance. One afternoon, a visiting envoy from a foreign court returns home in triumph, bearing missives that secure alliances. Weeks later, he falls ill with lung abscesses and persistent fever. His final letters speak of a malaise imported from Westminster, but never do they name the true perpetrator. The Queen's own breath, rendered poisonous by her cosmetic poisons and unchecked infections. In the kitchens, the court cook finds that the air in the servants' dining hall is thick with unseen hazards. Meals once prized for their flavoured sauces become vehicles for dissemination. Each serving spoon, each ladle, has brushed against the breath-touched air that coalesced on its handle. The line of food servers shortens as one by one they succumb to throat infections that escalate into pneumonia. By candlelight, the infirmary's occupants fill the narrow cots, their chests heaving with a rattling cough. Each caregiver, restless with duty, holds a cup beneath the next patient's chin, only to breathe in the same contaminated air. In quiet desperation, they begin to wear cloths over their faces, peppered with crushed herbs, to block the worst of the aroma, and with it, a fraction of the fungi and bacteria. But without genuine masks or fresh water, the protection is Pyrrhic. Meanwhile, the Queen remains untouched, her image of perfection preserved in every courtly portrait. She glides from chamber to chamber, her voice weaving through supplicants and dignitaries alike. They marvel at her poise, unaware that each whispered directive is a discharge of pathogenic agents, an unseen strike from a silent blade. And so, the royal cough becomes the kingdom's secret curse. Invisible, insidious, unstoppable without modern understanding of microbiology, it wields its power through devotion and ceremony. Each moment of admiration, each gulped decree, each turned page of her letters, all deliver the Queen's invisible weapon, diseased breath, potent and relentless. As your eyelids grow heavy with the weight of this truth, let the image of sooty parlours and fevered chambers dissolve. Rest now in the comfort of your own air, fresh and untainted by ancient courts. Sleep gently, knowing that today's simple pleasures, open windows, a cool breeze, a warm breath shared with loved ones, carry no ghostly echoes of that doomed court. Good night, and may your dreams be ever free of invisible intruders. Disgusting hygiene habit number 5. Opulent attire. The bacteria's trap. In the dim light of morning, when the palace corridors still echo with the hush of slumbering servants, the Queen's wardrobe stands as a monument to her grandeur and, unbeknownst to most, a vast breeding ground for disease. These gowns, embroidered silk, spangled with pearls, heavy velvet adorned with gold thread, and sumptuous satin layered beneath trains that sweep the marble floors, are each a fortress of filth, soaked through with sweat, menstrual blood, and the secretions of her body that, once absorbed by the fibers, never truly leave. Because these precious garments are feared as too delicate to launder in water, they receive instead only the briefest of refreshings, a sprinkling of scented powders, and a quick shake before being rehung. This perfume dust masks the stench of decay without cleansing it, driving microbes deeper into the weave. Each fiber, once moistened by bodily fluids, becomes a haven for Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus strains, and myriad fungal spores that flourish in the limited airflow trapped beneath layers of opulence. When a lady-in-waiting approaches to assist the Queen in donning her regal attire, she must lift the heavy skirts, hook dozens of tiny ribbons, and tug at stiff bodices. Fingers brush against areas saturated with dried blood and perspiration, and even the gentlest tug can abrade the skin, opening tiny portals for bacteria to invade. The delicate skin of the wrist and forearm, where many helpers rest their hands as they fasten corsets, soon becomes reddened and inflamed, pimpled with pustules that leak fluid and spread infection. Each new gown requires a small army, tailors to measure and adjust, embroiderers to weave intricate patterns, valets to steam and fluff the fabric, and attendants to stow away the old for future use. Yet none of these participants dare approach their task with fresh gloves or protective barriers. They work barehanded, their nails picking at seams that conceal colonies of microbes. When the gown is carefully folded and returned to its chest, the hidden pathogens are merely moved, not removed. In the cramped storage room, gowns share space with heavy cloaks and winter fur, creating a microcosm where humidity and darkness hold sway. A single speck of dried secretion, unnoticed, can germinate into a thriving community of bacteria that ride along ribbons and lace until the next wearing. Each reapplication breathes new life into these spores, sending them swirling into the air as the dress is slipped on once more. Because the Queen's broken skin has been treated with layers of lead-based cosmetics, traces of mercury often cling to the hems and seams of her clothes. When these toxins transfer to a maid's hands, they compound any existing infection, turning simple sores into chronic ulcers that refuse to heal. The combination of heavy metals and microbial invasion leaves attendants weak and feverish, their skin blackened at the edges, their bodies struggling under the weight of dual poisons. Mealtime becomes no safer. Servants who carry trays laden with dishes brush against the sweeping hems of gowns or tuck their fingers under skirts to steady platters. Unseen pathogens hitch a ride to kitchens and dining halls, where they settle on wooden tables and stone countertops. When cooks handle these surfaces, they cross-contaminate ladles and knives, allowing bacteria to infiltrate soups, stews, and the Queen's very own repasts. Even the most vigilant chef, unaware of the hidden cargo, finds his efforts to maintain cleanliness hopelessly undermined by the treasures of the royal wardrobe. Occasionally, a daring voice suggests thorough laundering, or the introduction of soap and hot water to the Queen's attire, but these proposals are met with horror. Water might ruin the silk's sheen, steam could warp the pearls, and soap might strip the fabric's natural luster. Instead, the court clings to the familiar remedy of more perfume and elaborate airing racks, convinced that scent and ceremony can preserve cleanliness. Yet each spritz of rosewater and each clumsy exhibition of laundry only jostles the bacteria into new patterns, distributing them more widely through the household. By twilight, word filters through the ranks of the sickening toll exacted by these practices. Attendants collapsing from septicemia, individuals developing abscesses on their hands and arms, maids rendered too weak to rise from bed. Those who recover bear the scars of their service toughened, pitted skin that marks them forever as victims of the Queen's vanity. Yet still the gowns remain unwashed, relics of a glittering court that prizes appearance over health. As candle flames gutter low and the castle settles into the hush of night, think of those elaborate gowns hanging silently in their dark closets. Beneath each shimmering ribbon and jeweled clasp lies a quiet menace, a trap for unsuspecting hands and tender flesh. Drift now into sleep, undisturbed by the shadowy presence of hidden bacteria, and rest in the knowledge that your own linens lie fresh and untainted beside you. May your dreams be free of velvet hems and pearl-studded snares, and may you awaken refreshed and safe from the silent scourge of opulent attire. Good night, and may your slumber be as pure as water on a sunlit morning. Disgusting hygiene habit. Number 6. Wigs and the war with lice and ticks. In the heavy half-light of dawn, when the first pale shafts of sunlight merely brush the stained windows of the royal chambers, another grim ritual unfolds with near religious solemnity, though it carries little that is divine. Every morning the attendants of Elizabeth I prepare her collection of elaborate wigs, masses of hair, either drawn from horses' manes or spun from early forms of human hair imitation, each one dusted liberally with white lead powder and scented oils designed to maintain a pristine appearance. Yet beneath this facade of fashion lies a veritable breeding ground for the most detested of courtly pests: lice, ticks, and a host of fungal invaders that flourish in the trapped warmth and darkness of piled-on hair. The ritual begins when one of the Queen's senior maids retrieves a wig from its ornate, velvet-lined box. The box itself is a vessel of contagion, having held wig after wig that bear the residue of months of wear. Minute flakes of dried skin, accretions of perfumed tallow, and the hidden detritus of countless tiny bodies clinging to every shaft. With gloved or more often bare hands, the attendant lifts the wig onto a stand, where it will await its turn on the Queen's head. Only then does another hand reach in, fingers tracing the dense curls, brushing away the surface dust while stirring up hidden colonies of lice that crackle softly as they scuttle for cover. As the maid shakes the wig lightly, a small cloud of lead powder drifts through the air, carrying with it spores of bread mold, like fungi, and the excrement of innumerable parasites. These invisible particles settle on nearby surfaces, silken draperies, polished marble floors, and the velvet upholstery of the Queen's chair, turning the entire dressing room into a microcosm of infection. Each breath drawn by the attendants becomes a gamble. They inhale the spores and the microscopic fragments of insect casings, unaware that these minute aggressors will soon find home in their own scalps or spark a rash of red bites across their arms. Next comes the combing. A comb, its wooden teeth coated in the same foul residue, is used to coax the wig's curls into a submissive shape. With every pass, the comb's teeth pry out eggs laid by female lice, which have hidden them in the interstices of the hair fibers. The eggs and the hatched nymphs fall like seeds onto the floor or onto the attendant's hands, where they can be transferred to sensitive skin. Soon, the maid's forearms become pockmarked with tiny, itchy red welts as the parasites leap from the wig to their new host. Once the wig is properly arranged, the Queen herself lifts it and sets it upon her head, adjusting it with serene composure, while the buzzing of tiny insects goes unnoticed behind her elegant composure. The heavy mass sits there for hours, trapping heat and humidity next to her scalp, allowing fungal spores, some from the powder, others from the ambient dampness, to germinate in the dark recesses of the wig. Candida and similar yeasts find an ideal environment to multiply, while the lice and ticks thrive on the warmth and the constant supply of feeding opportunities. Throughout the day, anyone unfortunate enough to hand a missive to the Queen, to adjust a fold of her robes, or to stand too near for audience risks contact with the wig's infectious inhabitants. Stray nymphs crawl down onto their shoulders and hair, seeking fresh skin upon which to bite. Ticks find their way into the nape of the neck, embedding themselves where the wound they create will fester, leading to localized swelling and infection that can spread through the lymphatic system. Servants begin to complain of fevers, of chills, and of open sores where bitten sometimes severe enough to require isolation in the infirmary. After the court day has ended, the wig is removed and returned to its box, but the cycle is far from complete. The box is merely closed, sealing in the moisture and the microbial life. No attempt is made to wash the wig or disinfect the stand. Water and soap are considered too harsh, likely to ruin the delicate curls or warp the felt foundation. Instead, A handful of perfumed powder may be added, and the box is shut until the next morning's ceremony, when the same horrors replay themselves. Outside the Queen's private quarters, the echoes of this infestation follow the courtiers and their bewildered guests. A visiting dignitary might touch the Queen's wig stand under the guise of polite inquiry, only to carry away crusted flecks of lead powder and the microscopic threats it contains. They deposit these particles on fine fabrics and furniture in distant halls, inadvertently sowing seeds of infection that will bloom days later in unexpected rashes or unexplained fevers among their retinue. In the kitchens below, dishes passed along a serving line bear not only the Queen's culinary choices, but also traces of these pests. A cook wiping a countertop picks up a fragment of lace-like fungal colony, a bit of residual lead, and perhaps even a lingering tick that hitches a ride on a serving spoon. Moments later, the staff who sample the evening's broth may find themselves writhing with abdominal cramps as enteric bacteria exploit their weary bodies. And so, the royal wig, emblem of ultimate refinement, stands revealed as a sacred talisman of contagion. Each coiffure worn by the monarch becomes an epicenter from which microscopic armies deploy, spreading disease through the grandest halls of power and down into the narrowest alleyways of London's lower quarters. It is a grim reminder that no amount of outward splendor can truly conceal the rot that festers within when hygiene is sacrificed at the altar of vanity. Now, slip into your own bed, far removed from velvet boxes and perfumed wigs. Let your head rest upon a pillow washed clean, free of hidden horrors. Breathe deeply, assured that in the quiet night you are safe from lice, ticks, and the silent invasion of fungal spores. Sleep peacefully, and may your dreams carry you not into palaces of decay, but into gardens of healing, gentle breezes. Good night, and rest in the comfort of pure, uncontaminated slumber. Disgusting hygiene habit number 7. The commode and death from the lidless seat. In the hushed pre-dawn hours, when the palace still breathes the last sighs of night, there stands beside the Queen's massive gilt bed, a simple, unadorned vessel, the commode. Though intended as a discreet convenience for anointed lips and noble limbs, it is in fact a lethal trap for the lowest-ranking servants tasked with its daily care. This commode, bereft of any lid or sanitary lining, sits half-hidden behind heavy draperies, its bowl left open to the stale air of the royal chamber. Each morning, a trembling attendant, often the most junior of the chamber staff, is summoned to empty this vessel. She approaches it with a cloth in one hand and the bowl in the other, careful to avoid the embroidered hem of her kirtle. With no gloves, no water to rinse, and certainly no disinfectant, she lifts the bowl's rim and carries its contents through the winding corridors to a nearby drain or midden. Along the way, droplets of liquid and slivers of waste splash onto her hands, her sleeves, and the stone floor, where they form dark, sticky stains that soon dry into crusted reminders of her grim task. The stench rising from that open bowl is immediate and overpowering, a pungent mix of human excrement, stale urine, and the faint tang of old blood. But it is more than mere odour that the commode releases. Clinging to its sides and lurking in its depths are vast colonies of bowel bacteria, Escherichia coli, Vibrio cholerae, Salmonella, and other enteric pathogens that flourish in waste's warm embrace. When droplets splash onto the attendant's skin or clothing, they deposit these microbes directly onto her body. As she walks past the Queen's bedchamber doorway, the mist of her own sweat and the pollution of the commode mingle, forming a vapour that drifts into the carpeted floor and the heavy velvet curtains. Those who follow ladies, in waiting, and more high-ranking servants, inhale this noxious cloud unwittingly. Within hours, the bacteria find new hosts. The attendant herself becomes the first victim. Stomach cramps, violent diarrhea, and relentless vomiting seize her by midday. Dehydration sets in quickly, her body unable to keep pace with losses. By nightfall, she collapses in agony and is borne off to the infirmary, her eyes rolled back, her voice reduced to pitiful moans. Each subsequent day, a fresh face is ordered to empty the commode. Some last only a single trip before succumbing to the same brutal symptoms and vanishing from the rolls as though they had never existed. Others linger, weakened by persistent dysentery, only to face excruciating deaths that the court records politely classify as fatal weakness or sudden disease. No tombstone marks their passing, no ceremonial farewell greets their absence. The commode's victims are erased from memory as swiftly as they disappear from the household. Meanwhile, the palace's more privileged corridors remain oblivious. Guests dine in great halls, oblivious to the path of contagion that runs through their kitchens. Pots of soup simmer while invisible droplets, carried from the commode via contaminated cloths or muddy shoes, find entry into hearty stews and fine breads. The cooks, too poor or too frightened to question their orders, wipe counters with the same soiled linens used to mop up commode spills. Plates arrayed with delicacies mask a deadly payload. In a single week, dozens of attendants fall ill. The infirmary, a modest chamber lined with straw mattresses, fills beyond capacity. Nurses, unprotected, untrained, tend to the sick, only to become patients themselves. For the court physicians, trained in the humoral theory, the cause is inscrutable. They blame an imbalance of sulfur and phlegm, prescribe vinegar poultices, bleeding, and purgatives that weaken the already feeble. They do nothing to address the true source, that lidless seat of putrefaction in the Queen's own chamber. The palace hierarchy shuns discussion of the commode. To acknowledge its role in these horrors would be to sully the Queen's dignity. Instead, they dismiss each fresh outbreak as a routine, noble malady or a seasonal flux. The Lord Chamberlain orders new recruits but insists on no changes to the commode's care regimen. Tradition and deference to rank outweigh the lives of the nameless. Outside the palace gates, the ripple effect becomes impossible to ignore. A messenger who once emptied the commode returns home to a village where wells and communal ovens instinctively lie near the castle walls. There, the plague of dysentery leaps from household to household, leaving lanes of death in its wake. Villagers quietly whisper of a curse emanating from the Queen's quarters, but no one dares speak it aloud. Back within the gilded halls, the commode remains unadorned, an unremarkable stool with a bowl that reveals nothing of the calamity it wreaks. No closed lid, no disinfecting vinegar, no gloves for its handlers. It sits waiting, a silent sentinel of contagion, claiming one life after another in patient anonymity. And so, in the grandest of settings, the simplest object becomes the deadliest. The lack of a lid transforms a convenience into a scourge. The absence of soap converts a vessel into a vector. The disregard for those who serve renders the palace itself a monument to suffering. Now, as you draw a deep breath in the safety of your own bedchamber, far from lidless privies and foul commodes, let yourself drift into sleep, unburdened by this tale of neglect. Imagine the cool night air, pure and free of unseen terrors. Rest easy, knowing that tonight your slumber is guarded by walls and water and wisdom that spare you the silent horrors of a court that forgot to seal its secrets. Good night, and may your dreams be sweet and your nights ever safe. Disgusting hygiene habit number 8. The cursed bedchamber, the sealed room. In the hushed stillness of the palace, beyond the glittering corridors and the murmur of courtly intrigue, lies a room so steeped in dread that even the boldest guards dare not enter. This is the Queen's final bedchamber, once the sanctuary of her rest, now sealed behind bricks and mortar, an inescapable tomb of decay and silent suffering. When Elizabeth I drew her last breath, the air in that chamber was already thick with the rancid perfume of old waste, the sour tang of unwashed linens, and the stubborn stain of months of untreated infection. The moment she passed, the decision was made. Lock it up, bar the door, and bury its horrors behind cold stone. No one spoke of cleansing with fire or water. Instead, masons were sent in, and one by one the windows were walled up, the door bricked over, as though entombing not merely a sovereign's final resting place but a festering wound no one dared nurse. The hallways outside the sealed entrance grew heavy, with a silence that pressed upon the ears and the lungs. Guards posted nearest to the room reported headaches so severe they could scarcely stand their posts, nausea that rose in waves when the wind shifted. Their breaths caught on some unseen barrier, as though inhaling centuries of rot. They whispered of walls that oozed dark stains at the joints, of ceilings where greenish mould crept like ivy, and of a stench that clung to their cloaks long after they retreated down the marble steps. Contractors called to build the wall found themselves stricken soon after. Respiratory distress seized them within days. Their chests heaved with coughing spells that rattled like chains. Some fell into fevers that burned through their strength in less than a week, leaving them too weak to rise again. In hushed tones, craftsmen referred to the chamber as the living corpse, convinced that the decaying presence of the queen's own body had seeped into every stone and fibre, poisoning souls who dared disturb it. By the time the final brick was mortared into place, the bedchamber was entombed in darkness. The quiet that followed was not peaceful, but charged an oppressive hush that pulsed beneath the palace floors. No lantern ever glowed behind those walls again. Tapestries once hung there were removed, their thick woolen folds believed to hold spores and miasmas too potent to risk air. Furniture was dragged out and dumped in a courtyard pit, rarely mentioned, soiled beyond recognition. Decades passed, yet the legend endured. Servants spoke of hearing faint scratching sounds behind the sealed door, faint rhythmic taps like fingernails dragging across stone. Others swore they smelled a whiff of stale perfume at the corner of their senses when they passed by, as though the queen herself lingered, itching for release. Visitors on guided tours centuries later would press their ears against the ancient bricks, half expecting a sigh or a moan, but always finding only the deafening refusal of sound that marks secrets buried too deep. In the early 18th century, physicians advanced a theory called the living corpse concept, insisting that a body left too long in confinement could continue to emit poisonous humours. They cited the sealed bedchamber as Exhibit A, touring students of medicine through the castle corridors to point at the bricked-up doorway and to warn how even royalty could not escape decay's relentless advance. Though the idea was flawed, it underscored a simple truth. Ignorance of proper sanitation elevates myth over miracle. Nothing was ever done to thoroughly purge that room of its contamination. Steam cleaning was unheard of, chemical disinfectants unknown. No one dared gamble on reopening it, for the risk of a sudden wave of illness loomed too large. Instead, architects built new wings and corridors that wound around the old bedchamber's tomb, ensuring the cursed space lay forever off any path of progress. Maps of the palace from successive reigns show expansions but never erasures. The bedchamber's sealed location remains a constant, a scar on every blueprint. Tourists today stand on polished floors and wonder at the silent panel where the brickwork is newer, the mortar fresher. Guides recite the legend in hushed, theatrical tones, cautioning, "Do not lean too close, or you may breathe its ancient poison." Visitors shuffle past, glancing at one another, half in scoffing disbelief, half in uneasy respect for a legend that, if nothing else, speaks to the power of fear and of what we choose not to cleanse. Thus, the Queen's once sacred bedchamber remains a monument to neglect, the ultimate result of arrogance in the face of infection. A place of rest, transformed into a resting place for disease itself. A room that could not be washed, could not be aired, could only be sealed in shame and forgotten in the fervent hope that obscurity might contain its malady. Now, as you lie in your own bed, protected by clean linens and modern understanding, know that you rest far from those cursed walls. Let sleep carry you gently away from tales of sealed rooms and living corpses. May your dreams be free of brick and mortar and swirling spores, and may your breathing be as light as a summer breeze. Good night, and know that the only thing you need fear is the dreamless sleep of peaceful rest. Disgusting hygiene habit number 9. The deathly furnishings, curtains, carpets, and mould. In the dim, torchlit corridors of Elizabeth's palace, every thread of velvet and every loop of woolen carpet hides a secret as chilling as the stone beneath it. These sumptuous draperies and thick floor coverings, symbols of wealth and power, have, over time, become silent incubators of disease, turning the very fabric of the court into a vast, creeping nursery for mould and bacteria. Imagine a chamber hung with heavy velvet curtains so luxuriously layered that they barely stir when the breeze slips through a crack in the window. To the eye, these curtains shimmer with regal colours. To the nose, they exhale a stale, damp aroma that hints at decay. Each fold has absorbed the perfume of 1,000 ceremonies, but it has also trapped the ghostly breath of countless attendants and the unseen spores of aspergillus, penicillium, and other moulds that feast on the moisture in the air. Underneath the velvet's pile, the fabric remains damp for days, even weeks, allowing mould colonies to bloom unseen. Likewise, beneath the courtier's dainty slippers lies carpet so dense and plush that it muffles footsteps into near silence. But the same density that once spoke of opulence now represses air circulation, trapping sweat, dust, and microscopic fragments of skin. Over time, These particles mix with the damp air, creating a fertile ground for Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus species to thrive. The carpet's surface becomes a living mat of pathogens, ready to release them in a silent puff each time a foot presses down or a drape is drawn aside. Every morning the chamber staff shuffles in to dust and sweep. Their tools are simple, feather dusters and coarse brooms, neither of which can reach the deepest pockets of filth. A mere brush across the surface sends clouds of spores and bacteria swirling into the air, where they drift lazily before settling on gowns, sheets, and exposed skin. The careful flick of a duster against a curtain resuspends decades of decay, and the attendant inhales a breath that carries the seeds of lung irritation and infection. Coughs echo in hidden corners as the chamber's invisible population makes itself known. When guests arrive for courtly proceedings, they step onto these carpets and brush past the curtains, unknowingly picking up fragments of mold and bacteria on their cuffs and hems. They carry these microscopic stowaways through banquets and councils, spreading them from hall to hall. A nobleman adjusting his cloak near a velvet-draped archway unwittingly brushes the curtain's edge, dislodges a puff of fine dust, and inhales spores that lodge in his lungs, where they can cause fevers, chills, and persistent coughs. Attempts to freshen the air rely on burning bundles of dried herbs, sage, rosemary, and thyme in braziers. The fragrant smoke curls and billows, masking the damp, musty smell, but doing little to kill the mold or the bacteria thriving in the furnishings. Likewise, powdered perfumes are scattered on carpets to mask stains and odors, but they only coat the surface, doing nothing to inhibit the invisible armies growing underneath. The great tapestries and carpets are occasionally taken down and shaken out in the courtyard, but a light shake only dislodges the topmost dust. It does not cleanse the deeper layers where spores have nestled for months or years. When complaints of illness start cropping up, guards posted near the draped windows reporting tightness in their chests, chambermaids racking up evenings spent in the infirmary with fevers, the court physicians blame bad air or imbalanced humours. They prescribe potions and bloodletting, ignorant of the real culprit woven into every thread. The carpets remain in place, the curtains unwashed, and the cycle of respiratory complaints continues. In some corners of the palace, the mold's greenish tendrils even stain the plaster walls, drawing alarming rivulets down toward the floor. Workers called in to repair the decay find themselves weakened by the very air they hope to clear. Their lantern flames gutter as they cough and wipe dripping mold from their foreheads. Yet, in deference to tradition and the Queen's vanity, the walls and hangings stay, revered for their beauty despite the danger they pose. Thus, the palace's deathly furnishings persist as an unseen menace. Beneath the veil of splendor, every sweep of a curtain and every step on a carpet stirs up pathogens that make servants wheeze and diplomats frown. The very markers of majesty, the rich fabrics, the intricate weaves become instruments of infection, unleashing waves of illness in the hushed grandeur of courtly life. And now, as you sink into your own bed, far from velvet and mold, let the memory of damp draperies and tainted carpets fade into the background of your mind. Breathe deeply and reassure yourself that your linens are clean, your floors are swept, and your sleep is guarded against the silent spores of the past. Drift off, safe in the knowledge that tonight's dreamscape is free of deathly furnishings. Good night, and may your slumber be pure and undisturbed. Disgusting hygiene habit number 10. The endless infection loop in the palace and period medicine. In the sleepy stillness of Elizabeth's court, where each hallway echoes with soft footfalls on cold stone and night's hush settles like a blanket, there exists a relentless cycle of disease, an unbroken chain of contamination that weaves through every bedchamber, every drape-covered alcove, every scented corridor. It is here, in the very heart of royal splendor, that servants huddle in shared rooms, stack their bedding on narrow pallet beds, and lie side by side beneath sheets that have soaked up sweat, soot, and secretions for weeks. The result is a breeding ground for infection so complete that no amount of whispered prayer or fumigated incense can halt its spread. Each dawn, when the first candles flare to life and the palace stirs, the bedding of that communal room remains damp with the residue of 1,000 restless nights. A single flake of skin, shed from the Queen's powdered face or a lady-in-waiting's damp brow, drifts onto the sheets. A single globule of nasal mucus, caught on a stray lace handkerchief, falls to the floor. Hundreds of such invisible particles mingle in the fibers of the linen where they remain imprisoned, alive with the potential for disease. When the laundry maids unclad in any protection enter to wash these sheets in stagnant basins of reused water, they carry those thousands of microscopic dangers on their bare fingers. They submerge the cloth in the same trough that has already cleansed kitchen rags and sooty mop heads. The water, once cleared of the visible grime, still brims with pathogens, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, Proteus, and others, all eager to latch onto fresh skin. Their hands become vectors, ferrying microbes from fabric to flesh, from the wash trough to the kitchen door. In the kitchens just beyond, cooks chop vegetables and stir broths, wiping their hands on frayed towels that have themselves been wiped across laundry-soaked boards. A single drop of that loaded water carrying E. coli, or a colony of fly-blown bacteria, finds its way into a ladle of soup or onto a serving spoon. Within hours, the steamy cauldron becomes a perfect vessel for transmitting intestinal diseases, violent diarrhea, dehydration, fever. Yet the royal table remains resplendent with platters, and no one dares question the safety of its fare. The palace physicians, schooled in the venerable but misguided theory of the four humours, can only attribute the resulting fevers and fluxes to an imbalance of black bile or an excess of phlegm. They prescribe purges and bloodletting, letting precious fluids drain from already weakened bodies. They smear ointments thick with mercury and lead onto festering sores, believing that like cures like, and thus unwittingly drive toxins deeper into the flesh. They recommend drinking concoctions of bracing alcohol, further depleting moisture and strength. Meanwhile, the cycle continues unbroken. A maid dismissed from the laundry for an inexplicable fever returns to her native village, carrying the same pathogens in her haggard body. There, crowded families share meagre meals and common wells, unaware that the contagion began not with rats in an alley, but with wet linens in the queen's own bedchamber. Thus, the sickness radiates outward from the palace walls into the surrounding city and countryside. Back within the palace gates, the loss of so many attendants provokes only more frantic recruitment, not reform. New servants arrive, bright-eyed and unacquainted with the palace's unspoken hazards. They too sleep in the communal room, handle soiled laundry, deliver dishes prepared in contaminated kitchens, and soon face the same grim fate. Each death is discreetly recorded as natural weakness or sudden malady, preserving the crown's dignity at the expense of countless lives. Even the occasional outbreak of smallpox and plague is chalked up to bad air, drifting in from London's streets, never to the court's own failures in cleanliness. No one dares propose a separate laundry for kitchen cloths. No one demands linen be boiled rather than simply dunked. No one imagines that wearing gloves or brewing fresh water might break the cycle. Professional pride and fear of offending the royal household keep the vicious loop spinning. By candlelight, surgeons stitch wounds with unsterilized needles, using thread passed from patient to patient. Apothecaries mix bitters and varnishes using mortar and pestle that also grind dried roots and crushed bones, cross-contaminating every batch. There are theories whispered in back corridors of hidden illnesses of unknown origin, but they are quickly dismissed, either hushed by palace officials or explained away as signs of spiritual test, not microbial invasion. Thus, the endless infection loop remains the 30th hidden pulse in the pulse of the palace, an invisible rhythm of decay that no courtly pageantry can mask. Yet it is a potent reminder: when hygiene is neglected, when shared spaces are contaminated, when medicine is blind to microbes, even palaces crumble under waves of disease. The cycle may seem unstoppable, but we know now that simple acts, a change of water, the boiling of linens, the use of protective gloves could shatter its hold and bring relief where once only sickness reigned. Disgusting hygiene habit number 11. Filthy armpit liners. In the quiet pre-dawn hush of the royal chambers, a small but sinister accessory lay hidden beneath the luxuriant folds of the queen's gowns, the armpit liner. To the uninformed eye, it seemed an innocuous strip of cloth, there to preserve the fine silk of her sleeves. Yet, over the course of a single day, these humble liners, swaths of soft linen pinned discreetly under each arm, became saturated repositories of sweat, chalky white powder, and the natural oils of her skin, transforming into a noxious breeding ground for odor-causing microbes. Elizabeth's attendants replaced these armpit liners so hastily, merely pulling out the spent cloth and sliding in a fresh strip that no one deemed necessary a proper laundering between uses. In the cramped, warm confines of the palace, the linen liners grew damp almost immediately. Each movement of the Queen's arms rubbed sweat and powder deeper into the weave, where it remained lodged long after the day's ceremonies concluded and the candles burned low. What no one realized at first was how readily those damp liners attracted and nurtured colonies of Proteus and Corynebacterium, the bacteria most notorious for producing foul underarm odors. In the dark recesses beneath the Queen's voluminous sleeves, small greyish spots of mould began to appear, furred edges skirling in on themselves. The cellulose fibres, steeped in moisture and skin oils, provided the perfect medium for these microorganisms to multiply unchecked. Each time the Queen lifted her arm, whether to accept a ribbon of honour, wave to the courtiers, or simply stretch the liner flexed and creased, releasing a faint but unmistakable whiff of ammonia and decay into the air. Courtiers standing nearby would wrinkle their noses, stealing glances at one another in puzzled disgust. But no one dared voice their misgivings. To question the Queen's personal hygiene was unthinkable. By midday, the liners had transformed into miniature petri dishes. Under the extreme warmth of a late summer sun, the sweat soaked through 2 layers of underslip before reaching the outer gown, carrying with it microbes that clung to the silk. The slightest brush of a sleeve along a velvet cushion left a lingering scent that perfumed the room with something far less regal than rosewater. When the liners were finally removed, usually in the privacy of the dressing room, the attendant peeled them away with gloved hands, only to reveal darkened smears of sweat and powder, dotted here and there with faint green mould spots. The fabric itself hung heavy and sodden, its once white surface turned mustardy and foul. Yet the maid would simply fold the liner and tuck it back into a chest, intending to reuse it before the next clean replacement. Each morning, a new liner was slapped into place, without ritual or care. No basin of warm water, no pot of boiling lye, no handful of aromatic herbs for a proper wash. Instead, the Queen's maids would pat the liners with a moist cloth, or if pressed for time, sprinkle them with perfumed powder to mask the smell. They believed, in their naivety, that the scent of lavender or violets could conquer any rankness. In reality, it only mingled with the bacterial stench to produce a new, more insidious aroma, one that seemed to linger in the folds of the palace walls long into the night. The real tragedy of these filthy armpit liners was how they spread contamination beyond the Queen's person. When the liners were discarded into baskets and later sorted by other servants, spores and microbes flaked off onto gloved hands, and thus onto every garment they touched. A single apprentice unloading the laundry cart might handle dozens of soiled liners, unwittingly transferring those bacteria onto clean napkins, tablecloths, or even into the kitchens where food was prepared. Soon, palace staff began to suffer mysterious irritations. A stable boy complained of an itchy rash under his arms after helping carry the Queen's gown. A seamstress handling the liners developed tender, inflamed bumps in the same area. They blamed the new boarder's sheer negligence, or perhaps a curse, but the true culprit remained the foul armpit liners. Over time, rumours spread of courtiers fainting in mid-audience, overcome not by political intrigue, but by the sudden assault of malodorous vapours released when the Queen raised her arm. Yet because the habit was so well hidden, it persisted unchallenged. No physician knew to prescribe a simple washing regimen. No advisor dared suggest a more hygienic alternative. In this sleepy court, where power and propriety held sway over practicality, the filthy armpit liner became emblematic of a broader blindness to the simplest truths of cleanliness. It took decades and the benefit of modern microbiology to fully understand how such a small piece of linen could wreak such havoc. Now, as you fold your own nightshirt and slip into fresh sheets, spare a thought for the poor souls who once endured that silent stench. Rest easy in your own clean air, wrapped in the assurance that tonight your underarms will not harbour secret armies of bacteria. Disgusting hygiene habit number 12. Unclean gloves and handsaws. In the dim glow of candlelight filtering through stained glass, the Queen's attendants prepare the day's attire with trembling hands. At her command, they slip soft leather gloves onto her delicate wrists, believing these supple coverings to be tokens of elegance and warmth. Yet, behind their smooth exterior, these gloves conceal a festering secret. They are never truly cleaned, only hastily wiped, and they become reservoirs of sweat, cosmetics, and microbial life that prey upon the skin of those who handle them. The morning ritual begins with the maid of honor selecting a pair of gloves from a small, ornate casket. The leather, once a creamy cream or pale pink, now bears faint streaks of darker discoloration along the fingers and creases evidence of countless days' wear without proper washing. A single droplet of rosewater may have been dabbed upon them the previous eve, but that feeble splash of fragrance can do nothing to penetrate the oils and powders that have soaked deep into the fibers. As the gloves are tugged into place, the queen's slender hands slide within, and the inner lining absorbs a new layer of moisture from her palms. Underneath the gloves, a film of talc and face powder applied to the hands to maintain a porcelain sheen mixes with her sweat, creating a damp, nutrient-rich environment, ideal for bacterial growth. Meanwhile, the outer surface of the glove, in contact with the cloth of gowns and curtains, picks up stray flakes of dead skin. The leather, unable to breathe fully, traps these deposits in its pores. When an attendant next helps the queen fasten a sleeve, she first lifts her own gloved hand to smooth the fabric, then carefully lights a scented taper with the same glove. No one thinks to change into a fresh pair, nor to wash the leather. The queen's servants assume that if the gloves look clean, they are clean. But microscopic colonies of Staphylococcus aureus and yeasts, Candida species, have been thriving for days, even weeks, on that very surface. The first victim of this unclean glove habit is often the maid who adjusts the queen's cuffs. As she presses the glove against her own ungloved fingers to secure a ribbon, the bacteria thrust through the thin barrier into tiny scratches and cuts on her skin. At first, she feels only a slight sting, no more than the pricking of a pin. But within hours, the site becomes red and swollen, a small pustule forming beneath the surface. By afternoon, the sore has grown tender and warm to the touch. A small bead of yellowish fluid appears at its center, the hallmark of a bacterial abscess. In the infirmary, the court physician examines the lesion and pronounces it an imbalance of humours, recommending a poultice of herbs and a touch of mercury ointment. The poor maid pricks the sore to let out the pus, only to find it quickly refills. Day by day, the infection spreads, climbing from one hand to the wrist, then to the arm. In some cases, the entire hand becomes painfully inflamed, stiff and grooved with deep red welts. Nurses attempt to dress the wound with clean linen, but the same tainted water used to rinse gloves is often employed to soak the dressings. The cycle of contamination perpetuates itself with grim precision. Meanwhile, the gloves remain in constant use. Once removed from the queen's hands at day's end, they are folded and placed back into their casket, where leather dust gathers on their surface. Days later, a new attendant might slip them on during an evening reception, unknowingly brushing them across her own skin and starting the infection process anew. There is no rotation of pairs, no airing out by an open window, no sunlight to dry and disinfect the leather. The palace physicians, bound by tradition and ignorance of germ theory, cannot fathom the true source of these festering sores. They blame night vapors or stagnant palace air, prescribing salves of crushed herbs, or advising the maids to carry sprigs of lavender to ward off evil humours. Yet the gloves remain untouched, a silent instrument of disease hidden in plain sight. Over the weeks, as more attendants fall ill, each with similar red puckered ulcers on their hands, the court librarian, turning a page of a precious tome, feels a twinge of pain where her fingers brush the parchment. She too has helped don those unclean gloves. Soon she too lies in fevered misery, her skin weeping beneath the sheets. At last, a brave courtier dares to suggest that perhaps it is the gloves themselves that carry this curse. But the queen, suspicious of any challenge to her comfort or her court's dignity, dismisses the notion. The leather remains an indispensable part of her regalia, and so the gloves continue their silent rampage. In the stillness of the night, when only the guards patrol the corridors, the infected hands of the attendants lie clenched in sleep, each pulse sending fresh waves of bacteria racing beneath the skin. Come morning, the cycle repeats. The gloves are retrieved, the leather is flexed, and the pathogens pass again from gloved fingers to ungloved hands. Thus, the unclean gloves and the attendants' hand sores stand as disgusting hygiene habit number 12. A vivid reminder that elegance, unchecked by cleanliness, can mask a deadly peril. And so, as you lay down your own gloves and wash your hands before sleep. Imagine the difference clean water and soap can make. Disgusting hygiene. Habit number 13. Poisoned dining utensils. In the dimly lit banquet hall of the court, where candles gutter and taper wax drips like tears onto polished oak tables, the Queen's silverware stands arrayed in glimmering rows. At first glance, it seems the very height of refinement. Goblets of heavy silver, ornate spoons with filigreed handles, and plates rimmed with the finest metal. Yet behind their gleaming beauty lies a horror all the more insidious for its subtlety. These utensils, chendia bark in the tongue of the realm, are handled not by gloved hands, but by damp cloths that have seen far too much use. Each morsel of food, each drop of spiced wine, leaves behind microscopic traces of poison that will soon reveal themselves in agonizing sickness. The process begins when the feast concludes and the guests withdraw to the gardens. Under the torchlight, a pair of maids gathers the silver plates, cups and forks into a wicker basket. Rather than carry them to a scalding pot, they fetch a frayed linen cloth, a towel already stained with broth drippings and previous night's wine, dampened in a basin of tepid water that has grown murky from use. They wipe each piece as if dusting venerable furniture, confident that a quick rub will restore the shine. On occasion, a pinch of lavender or rosemary might be scattered atop the basin, but the fragrant sprigs float helplessly on the surface, doing nothing to cleanse the metal beneath. As the utensils are laid out to dry, stacked carelessly on a wooden tray or tucked into a narrow cupboard, no one realizes just how many unseen particles cling to their surfaces. Tiny flecks of food, flecks of lead-laced face powder from the Queen's handkerchief, and droplets of her wine-diluted saliva adhere to the silver. Over the ensuing days, these residues not only oxidize but mingle with the sweat of servants who retrieve them, turning once pristine implements into vectors of infection. When the next banquet is prepared, cooks lift these tainted dishes from their shelf and lay them before visiting nobles and courtiers. A server ladles soup from a pot into the Queen's porcelain bowl, then slides the same spoon across the lip of each dish in turn. A slight drip of steamy broth, now carrying streptococcus or a pinch of heavy metal powder, glides into the waiting mouths of heralds and chamberlains. They savor each spoonful, unaware that it carries a cocktail of bacteria primed to unleash acute gastritis and violent stomach cramps. Within hours, the first victim arrives at the royal infirmary. A high-ranking minister, clutching his abdomen, sweat beading his forehead. His face turns ashen as waves of nausea rattle his frame. A physician murmurs of heated humours, or excess bile, prescribing teas of sage or syrup of violets to soothe the stomach. But the true culprit remains obscured. The once lustrous silverware is the very source of the poison. Meanwhile, the Queen herself, attended only by her closest confidants, continues to dine from the same assembly of plates. Her delicate constitution allows her to disguise any discomfort, perhaps swallowed up in layers of powdered cosmetics or masked by the soothing balm of courtly wine. But her bravura in consuming each course without a flinch only cements the belief that the utensils are safe, prompting new guests to lower their guards of fateful error. By the second banquet, more victims fall ill. A guard stationed in the anteroom gasps and staggers when offered water from a silver goblet. A lady in waiting, sipping too hastily, spills a drop of vile-tasting liquid along her lips before slumping to the floor. The infirmary swells with suffering souls, their bellies racked by cramps and their bodies weakened by dehydration. Yet still, no connection is made between their plight and the dining implements themselves. The servants continue their ritual of scant rinsing and perfumed wiping. At night, when all is quiet and the last torch guttering in its sconce, the maids tiptoe to a basin, fetch the cloth they believe cleansed the silver, and repeat the cycle. Unseen by them, stubborn colonies of Proteus and Bacillus creep across the curved surfaces, forging new alliances with any drop of moisture or scrap of food they find. Under candlelight, the silver gleams brighter than any jewel. Its beauty is preserved, its danger utterly hidden. Even the most erudite physician, schooled in the annals of Hippocrates and Galen, cannot fathom that these lacquered relics of the table are the conduits of such widespread affliction. He speculates instead on poisoned meats or tainted water from distant provinces. Meanwhile, The silverware is set aside only for a perfunctory swish in cold well water before reuse. And so the poisoned dining utensils perpetuate their deadly work, passing from hand to hand, from feast to feast, leaving in their wake a trail of fainted courtiers, languid chamberlains, and shivering guards. Each bite taken from the Queen's table carries within it the seeds of acute gastroenteritis, a silent, invisible dagger aimed at the most illustrious and the most humble alike. Tonight, as you set your plate aside and dip your spoon into a fresh pot of soup at home, spare a thought for those who once dined at Elizabeth's court. Let the memory of silver that shone with hidden rot remind you to wash your own dishes thoroughly, to let hot water run over every crevice, and to remember that what gleams on the surface may conceal a threat beneath. Disgusting hygiene habit number 14. Contaminated water taps. In the pre-dawn hush of the palace, the ancient well stands at the heart of the courtyard, a lifeline for everyone within these great stone walls. Each morning, the royal laundress descends the narrow stairway to its mossy mouth, where the rope creaks like an old man's bones as she lowers a bucket into its stagnant depths. The water is drawn up, pale and deceptively clear, but beneath its surface lurks a hidden army of pathogens, coliform bacteria, protozoan amoebae, and other microscopic dangers born of years of disuse and sediment. The Queen's attendants line up along the corridor with wooden basins brimming with this tainted water. In gentle obedience, each maid dips her fingers in to test its chill before pouring it over the Queen's powdered cheeks and soft curls. She holds a basin beneath the stream as the second attendant massages shampoo into the Queen's hair, unaware that every droplet carries organisms eager to invade the pores and spread their toxins. No one dares question this daily rite. The well's water, though unchanged for decades, is deemed a royal provision sacrosanct and beyond reproach. The very idea of drawing fresh water from distant springs is unthinkable, for tradition outweighs prudence. Instead, a handful of lavender might be tossed into the bucket, a feeble attempt to mask the musty scent that lingers in the stone well. Yet the result is far from fragrant. By mid-morning, the first victim arrives at the infirmary. A chambermaid, her eyes reddened and puffy, complains of burning skin after carrying 5 heavy pails. A footman stationed by the hall doors experiences sudden chills and feverish sweats. Within hours, the infirmary's cots fill with servants suffering acute gastroenteritis, violent cramps, relentless diarrhea, and bouts of vomiting that leave them weak and trembling. Physicians, bound by outdated doctrines, attribute the symptoms to wandering humours or mists of night, prescribing herbal concoctions and warm ale to restore balance. But their treatments do nothing to address the true cause. The very water meant to cleanse the body is itself the vector for disease. Day after day, the cycle repeats. Basins are refilled, faces are washed, and hair is rinsed. The laundry water, which also sees linens, laces, and rags, becomes a communal reservoir of bacteria. When cooks draw from the same well for porridge and broth, the pathogens follow into the castle kitchens. Here, scullery maids collapse from sudden bouts of dysentery, clutching wooden spoons and ladles as the broth they stir becomes yet another carrier of infection. Efforts to cleanse the water are half-hearted. Sometimes buckets are rinsed in an adjacent trough, or scented oils are dripped onto the surface, but these measures do nothing to kill the microbial invaders. The well's stones remain coated in biofilm, a slimy matrix that shelters bacteria and amoebae from any casual rinsing. Only a thorough scrubbing unthinkable in the eyes of tradition would dislodge them. Meanwhile, the palace guard, entrusted with drawing water for the Queen's chamber pot, bring fresh buckets from the well each evening. They carry them across damp corridors, their boots clicking on marble floors, the buckets sloshing water tainted with invisible threats. Each trip spreads contamination. Droplets fall, unnoticed, onto tapestries and rugs, seeping through the thick pile and leaving new colonies behind. By the end of the month, the infirmary has become a chamber of misery. Ranks of beds line the hall, each occupied by someone weakened by dehydration and fever. The castle's apothecary jars stand unused on their shelves as nurses work feverishly to comfort the afflicted with nothing more than soft cloths and sympathetic words. Still, the well goes uncleaned. No official decree orders fresh water to replace it. No engineer is summoned to dig a new source. No ritual banquet or council intervention challenges its sanctity. The contaminated water remains the palace's hidden peril, a constant reminder that luxury without regard for cleanliness can be more deadly than any battlefield. Thus, habit number 14 reveals itself in all its grim reality. The water that was meant to purify instead becomes the poison that afflicts. The Queen's attendants continue their morning toilette without question, and the well's depths hold fast to their microbial cargo. In the silent ache of each servant's stomach, in the fevered cheeks of the infirm, the tragedy of negligence unfolds proof that even a royal palace, with all its grandeur, can fall victim to the simplest lapse in hygiene. Disgusting hygiene habit number 15. The void bath chamber. In the hushed corridors of the palace, just beyond the echo of footsteps, lies the void bath chamber, a name whispered by servants who dare not linger too long within its damp, shadowed walls. This chamber, intended for the cleansing of royal flesh and spirit, instead stands as a monument to neglect. Its single basin is nothing more than a cold wooden vat, unlined, unsealed, and perpetually half-filled with tepid water drawn from the same stagnant well used for all palace needs. No heated coil or brazier stands nearby to offer warmth. No ornate brass fixtures exist to temper the chill. The Queen, revered for her serene bearing, seldom deemed it necessary to bathe. Each morning, an attendant shivers as she carries a bucket of the well water into the void chamber. She hesitates at its threshold, the low light revealing moss creeping across stone tiles and dark stains on the wooden bath's edges. A lone soap dish carved from marble yet coated in dust holds a single bar of soap. This soap, when new, boasted a delicate fragrance of lavender and rosehip oil, but now its edges are rounded and cracked, the scent long since faded. A small vial of fine perfumed oil sits beside it, its stopper sticky with residue, a mere ornament rather than a practical offering. With deliberate slowness, the attendant lifts the lid from the basin and tips the bucket of water inside. The basin creaks in protest, and a foul undertone rises from the depths, an amalgam of mold, mildew, and centuries of uncleaned filth. When the water stirs, microscopic motes swirl upward, invisible harbingers of illness. The servant barely dares to breathe as she sets the bucket down, her cheeks paling as memories of past fainting fit return. She splashes a handful of water over her own wrists to test its warmth and recoils. It is colder than the dawn air, each droplet sending shivers up her arms. The Queen, when she deigns to enter this chamber, an act reserved for rare moments of necessity, must rely on her attendants to heat none, scrub nothing, and preserve appearance over cleanliness. The attendants, racked by duty, must undress her carefully beside the basin, laying her elaborate gowns on a nearby bench crusted with old mud and threads. Then, one by one, they dip the Queen's hands into the water, coaxing her limbs into the basin, her skin brushing against the jagged grain of the wood. No rubber mat cushions the contact. No porcelain tub offers gentle support. As the Queen's limbs rest in the icy pool, the water's surface reflects the dim lantern light in watery ripples. Bubbles of trapped residue drift across the basin, carrying spores of aspergillus and penicillium into contact with her skin. Every minute in the bath allows these mold spores to settle into creases of flesh, invisible yet potent. The attendant wets a cloth with the same water to wipe the Queen's arms, chest, and neck, then folds the cloth beside the basin, where it will remain damp and seed further fungal growth. When the ritual concludes, the basin's water, now a murky stew of dissolved soap scum, skin flakes, and mold spores, is tipped unceremoniously into a drain that leads nowhere sanitary. The drain is a mere slot in the stone floor, leading to the labyrinth below, where other refuse pools in dark corners. Nothing is scrubbed, nothing is rinsed. The basin's wood, swollen and blackened at its seams, retains a pulpy slime that no amount of scrubbing can dislodge. Each subsequent bathing session begins with the same toxic broth as its predecessor. The attendants themselves, forced to enter this chamber again and again, feel the toll on their health. Their skins develop red, itchy patches where the mold spores take hold. Some contract persistent rashes that weep and crust over, while others experience recurrent fevers and chills, as though their bodies fight an invisible cold that seeps through their bones. The only remedies offered are herbal poultices applied to their skin-thick pastes that only serve to trap moisture against the raw flesh and deepen the infection. Night after night, the void bath chamber remains unused, neglected, and yet alive with its concealed horrors. A candle's flicker reveals streaks of black mold crawling up the walls and green algae hugging the basin's lip. No new soap arrives, no fresh oils are added. The Queen's sovereign presence seems to radiate beyond the threshold, yet she remains untouched by bath or basin. Her image, preserved in stiff paintings, suggests purity and majesty, but the chamber's dark reputation tells a bleaker story. May this final disgust of royal neglect remind us that true hygiene requires more than a perfumed bar of soap or a basin of water. Even a queen's bath requires warmth, cleansing, and care. Guard your own vessels, your tub, your basin, your shower against stagnation, mold, and decay. For without them, the act of bathing becomes not a purification, but a slow poison. Disgusting hygiene habit. Number 16. Elizabethan medicine and its powerless remedies. In the dim glow of the palace's sick room, where candles gutter and shadows dance along the damp stone walls, the court physicians gather around a trembling patient. This is habit number 16, the utter helplessness of Elizabethan medicine in the face of the Queen's rot. Though they hold skull-like flasks of bitter tinctures and jars of pungent salves, their arsenal is powerless against the invisible armies of bacteria, fungi, and parasites that ravage the royal household. Each morning, the king's surgeon enters the infirmary, his thick leather gloves stained by ointment and his scented gloves tucked beneath his elbow. He carries no microscope, no understanding of microbes, only a mortar and pestle filled with dried herbs, aloe leaves, wormwood, and mallow flower. The prescriptions he writes invoke the ancient theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, believed to govern every fever, blister, and ache. When a lady in waiting arrives with red welts and weeping sores on her arms, her condition is diagnosed as an excess of choler or a lack of sanguine temperament. With a sigh, the surgeon orders a regimen of bloodletting, a small incision beside the patient's elbow, where dark veins pool under the skin. He applies a brass lancet, its edge smeared with wax, but he cannot sterilize it in any modern sense. The blade cuts flesh that has never known soap, and blood seeps into the surgeon's unwashed gloves. The patient winces, her pulse slackening, as a small cup fills with her life's crimson. This is believed to purge the bad humours. But what truly happens is a loss of strength and immunity, leaving her more vulnerable to hidden pathogens. Next, the surgeon prepares a poultice made of mercury ointment, an age-old remedy. He spreads the mercurial paste across maggots of linen, then applies it to the patient's ulcer. Mercury, now recognized as a potent neurotoxin, burns the skin mercilessly, driving off surface inflammation. Yet beneath, the infection burrows deeper, feeding on the poisoned flesh. The patient's skin tingles with agony, and a noxious smell rises from the wound, an iron tang that lingers on every piece of cloth. If fever grips the sufferer, the physicians turn to a mixture of purgative wine and rhubarb bark. They insist the wine's astringent warmth will clear the bowels of malign spirits, while the rhubarb draws out toxins. The patient sips the bitter concoction, then retires to a dark corner to purge herself violently. The act of purging, though thought cleansing, only depletes the body further, robbing it of fluids and vitamins it so desperately needs. When complaints of cough and chest tightness arise, a common affliction among those exposed to contaminated air, the remedy is a concoction of burnt feathers, powdered gemstones, and crushed thyme. This bird's breath powder is inhaled through a hollow reed, its ash meant to clear the lungs. Instead, it scratches the throat and saturates the sinuses with dust, aggravating the patient's discomfort. To the physicians, it is the best available therapy, for they cannot see the mold spores clinging to velvet drapes or the stench rising from festering wounds. Throughout these rituals, the surgeon scribbles in a leather-bound ledger, noting the patient's condition as malignant flux or constitutional weakness. There is no record of microbes or contagion, only an endless cycle of bleeding, purging, and poisoning. Patients die quietly, unremarked by historians, their deaths attributed to an imbalance of elements rather than a preventable infection. Meanwhile, the hospital wards remain dank and crowded. Bedding is changed infrequently, its linen washed in the same stagnant water drawn from the palace's well. No one imagines the concept of sterilizing instruments or isolating patients. Instead, Those suspected of contagion are merely moved to a corner, where they lie amid the sick and the infirm, trading coughs and rashes. Their cries echo through the corridor, mingling with the rustle of rats in the rafters above. Outside the infirmary, courtiers continue their glittering days, oblivious to the suffering within. They order new gowns, attend lavish banquets, and meet in the privy chamber, where the air still carries spores washed in with the Queen's bath water and spores stirred from the thick carpets. Even the physicians themselves, shuffling between beds, ingrain the hospital scuttlebutt with their unwashed coats and gloves. Disgusting hygiene habit number 17, the chain of contagion from palace to streets. In the early morning gloom, long after the candles in the royal chambers have guttered low, the silent horrors of Queen's rot creep outward, extending their reach far beyond the palace walls. This is habit number 17, the unbroken chain of infection that begins in the gilded halls and winds its way through cobblestone lanes, into crowded marketplaces, and deep into the homes of ordinary Londoners. Each evening, as the last flickers of daylight fade, the palace guard gathers at the great gates. They have spent their day standing vigil in corridors thick with contaminated air, their uniforms brushed against velvet tapestries laden with mould spores and sweat. When they mount their posts near the city's edge, they carry with them more than musk and memory. They carry bacteria clinging to fabric and hair, staphylococci nestling in buttonholes, and streptococci hiding in the folds of their cloaks. From the guard, the contagion leaps into the city's bloodstream. A sentry shifts his weight, brushing the side of a passing cart. The horse-drawn carriage jolts forward, its wheels churning dusty stones, stirring up particles of powdered lead from the Queen's cosmetics, still embedded in every fibre of her entourage's clothing. Shopkeepers lean from doorways to inspect arriving goods, their elbows brushing against the shoulders of servants who carried trays trimmed in gilt. With each contact, unseen pathogens hitch a ride. Servants, dismissed from palace service at dusk, trickle into the narrow alleys that lead to rented rooms and crowded inns. They carry laundry water stained with mould and blood, basins sloshing at their side. They share communal wells, dipping their buckets into pools where the palace's wastewater gathers. There, intestinal bacteria Escherichia coli, Salmonella, Shigella multiply in the mire. When hungry labourers collect water for their meagre supper, they drink in the palace's filth with every mouthful. In village hamlets beyond the city, returning palace workers bring more than souvenirs. A farmhand once assigned to haul the Queen's food arrives home pallid and feverish. His eldest daughter tends his fever with herbs, unaware that the same broth she offers is tainted by invisible agents. Soon, neighbours gather for wakes. Priests recite prayers for sudden ailments, and parish records fill with the phrase, "death by unknown fever." All the while, the colonial outbreak swells, fueled by ignorance and the lack of quarantine. At London's bustling markets, hawkers extol the virtues of fresh produce. A vendor displays rows of apples and onions on a stall draped with velvet to impress noble customers. Yet the velvet carries spores of Aspergillus, Penicillium and Candida, transferred earlier from palace curtains by laundering staffs who never washed their clothes properly. When a child presses a hand to the stall to steady himself, he picks up more than dust, he collects the seeds of infection. Meanwhile, itinerant minstrels and tradesmen ply their crafts from tavern to tavern. Each tavern's crowded tables bristle with pewter cups and wooden platters rinsed in polluted water. Goblets of wine handed from traveller to traveller bear the Queen's rot in their dimples. A nobleman returning from a diplomatic visit falls ill after a single flagged cup, his cough carrying droplets of bacteria into the night air. The tavern keeper, ignorant of his role in the contagion, continues to refill cups as long as coin clinks on the counter. By candlelight, families gather for supper in cramped rooms. Bread is torn by hands that yesterday opened palace doors. Steam rises from broth made with vegetables washed in the same water that once rinsed the Queen's dishes. A cough in the adjacent bed triggers another, and within days the household succumbs to the relentless cycle. Fever, chills, delirium, collapse. Children weep for mothers, widows wail for fathers, and the streets fill with the poor claiming bodies to bury in mass graves. Despite rumours reaching city officials, no public health measures are enacted. The notion of isolating the sick is deemed scandalous. Admitting the palace's role in disease would shatter the monarchy's image. Instead, parish boundaries are redrawn, markets relocated, and new wards built distinct districts for the healthy and the infirm. Yet without proper sanitation or understanding of contagion, the separation is only symbolic. Guards and servants slip between them, carrying infection like a torch passed in the dark. As weeks drag into months, the contagion distorts the very fabric of London's society. Election meetings and guild gatherings are postponed. Merchants fear trade fairs. Even the Thames itself, once a lifeline of commerce, becomes a tumbling steamer of contaminated refuse. Its currents bearing filth from palace sewers to wharves where fishermen mend nets. The fish they catch, salted for preservation, may harbour pathogens on their scales, delivering disease to dinner tables far from the epicentre. By the time the Queen's private coping chamber is finally sealed, the rot has long since outpaced any palace door. The chain of contagion unravels across the city, touching every rung of society. In the hush before dawn, Londoners shutter windows and whisper prayers, uneasy at the thought that no corner of the capital remains unspoiled. Thus unfolds habit number 17, the palace's unholy export of disease, extending a silent plague into the very heart of the city, all because the royal household never questioned its own filth. It stands as a stark testament to the power of neglect, that the most splendid palace can become the fountainhead of an epidemic, and that invisible killers slip through etiquette and ceremony, bridging golden halls to cobbled streets in a relentless march of infection. Disgusting hygiene habit number 18, the cursed legacy and fear in architecture. In the stillness of the palace's later expansions, long after the passing of Elizabeth I, there lingers what may be called habit number 18, a dread legacy woven into the very walls of royal architecture. After the Queen's death, courtiers and successive sovereigns undertook earnest efforts to erase signs of the silent plague that had stalked the corridors. Plaster was reapplied to ceilings, tapestries were replaced, and regilded panels attempted to conceal spots of mould and decay. Yet, despite these painstaking renovations, a certain wing of the palace remained irrevocably tainted in legend, a sealed chamber that no living soul dared enter. As centuries slipped by, architects and monarchs continued to skirt around the cursed room, carving new passageways, erecting fresh galleries, and constructing entire pavilions to divert traffic away from the Forbidden Quarter. By the 18th century, the embryonic field of primitive medicine had conceived the living corpse theory, an unfounded notion that a body left to rest too long in one place could itself become a source of disease. The Queen's silent chamber was cited as the quintessential example, its brickwork held aloft as proof of how humours and miasmas might linger in stone and mortar. Though modern science would dismiss such ideas, at the time they reflected a pervasive fear that death left an invisible imprint that no sweeping or scrubbing could ever remove. Surveying the period maps and architectural plans, one finds the outlines of that restricted zone still faintly marked a blank space among the otherwise detailed sketches of court apartments. Even today, tourists on guided palace tours are cautioned to avoid the restricted corridor, told to pause at a certain balustrade and listen to the guide's hushed retelling of footsteps heard behind sealed doors. Many believe that residual dampness seeps from the old bricks, carrying spores and ancient bacterial remnants into the very air of adjacent rooms. It is said that on certain evenings, if one stands quietly enough and fancies the breeze just right, a faint odour may drift along the hallways, a mingling of old candle wax, rotting wood, and something darker, a miasma that seems to whisper tales of the past. This lingering architectural curse serves as a stark reminder of how fear and disease intertwine with history and culture. Invisible though viruses and bacteria may be, their impact is etched indelibly into the built environment and collective memory. The palace's expansions, its labyrinthine passages and airy salons, all bear witness to the lengths that power would go to maintain dignity and grandeur, even as the invisible threat gnawed at the foundations of courtly life. In folk tales and whispered lore, the sealed chamber became a symbol of death's stubborn hold, a testament to how the traumas of hygiene neglect could echo through generations. Yet, amid the hush and the cautionary tales, there is also a curious comfort, that even the most splendid structures are vulnerable to decay, and that the truest form of cleansing sometimes lies not in bricks and mortar, but in collective remembrance and openness. The palace's cursed wing is no longer barricaded in fear, but is preserved as a historical curiosity, allowing visitors to confront the reality that past mistakes neglecting sanitation ignoring infections, trusting in superstition, have shaped our understanding of disease prevention. So as you wander the echoing corridors of regal stone, take a slow, deep breath, acknowledging both the beauty and the buried fear. Remember that habit number 18 warns us of how architectural splendor alone cannot banish invisible threats. It is only through knowledge, through vigilance in hygiene and science, that we can transform cursed spaces into lessons for the future. May this eerie chapter of palace lore fade gently into the background of your thoughts, leaving you with a newfound respect for the humble wonders of soap, water, and fresh air tools that even the grandest of monarchs once lacked. And now, as the somber tales of Queen's rot gently recede into the shadows of history, let us take a deep breath and allow our minds to drift softly on the evening breeze. All those quiet images, every cracked layer of white lead powder, each weary step upon the velvet carpets, even the whispered lore of the sealed chamber, let them dissolve like morning mist beneath the sunrise. This story, though tinged with the chilling spectre of microbes and the complicity of fear, carries a simple and invaluable message. Our health, above all else, is nurtured by the smallest of habits: washing our hands thoroughly, bathing regularly, drying our clothes, and changing the water in our containers. Perhaps no lesson in history reminds us more clearly of the worth of personal hygiene and public health. Imagine that, in place of lavish robes and crowns, a warm towel or the gentle patter of a running shower is the true power that preserves life. And it is here, in the contrast between authority and cleanliness, that we discover health is not a vanity accessory, but the shield that protects every tranquil moment. Now let your shoulders drop, relax each finger, and let your eyes grow heavy. Breathe in a steady, rhythmic cadence, like the whisper of waves upon a shore. The images of moss-covered palace chambers, the old wooden combs, the mildew-laden draperies allow them to stretch and melt away in the ocean of memory. Worry not, for tomorrow the sun will rise again, bringing light and the chance to care for ourselves more kindly. Listen to the beat of your own heart. Feel the warmth expanding in your chest and remind yourself, after every long night, body and spirit must be renewed. Safety resides in simple rituals: a drop of soap, a gentle combing of hair, a wash of clean fabric, each contributing to keep our lives out of harm's reach. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the magic of sleep beckons, let your inner voice whisper, "All old shadows have settled, leaving only me and peaceful dreams." Wishing you a night of restful slumber and sweet dreams, and may you awaken filled with renewed energy. Don't forget to subscribe so that each evening brings you fresh stories, videos carefully chosen, both enlightening and captivating. And when darkness falls once more, we invite you back to our channel, where every fear will be retold and transformed into a gentle lesson. Good night,